An old Buddhist is saying, the tighter you squeeze, the less you have. Right now, in this very moment, you might be squeezing so tightly onto something, a relationship that ended, a mistake you made years ago, a future you're desperate to control, that your knuckles have turned white and your soul has forgotten how to breathe. You're exhausted, aren't you? Exhausted from carrying weights that were never meant to be permanent, from fighting battles that ended long ago, from trying to hold water in your clenched fists while it inevitably seeps through your fingers. What if I told you that Buddhism offers a radical truth that could change everything? Your suffering doesn't come from what you've lost, but from what you're still trying to hold. Today, we're going to explore the profound art of letting go, not as an act of defeat, but as the ultimate victory over unnecessary suffering. Part 1: The Buddha's Discovery of Suffering's Root. The Story of the Burning House. The Buddha once told a parable about a wealthy merchant who lived in a magnificent house. One day, while the merchant was away, his house caught fire. His children were inside, playing with their toys, completely unaware of the danger. The merchant returned to find his home engulfed in flames, his children visible through the windows, still playing, oblivious to the fire creeping toward them. He shouted for them to come out, but they were so attached to their toys, so absorbed in their games, that they ignored his desperate calls. The toys would burn anyway, everything in the house would be destroyed, but the children couldn't see past their immediate attachments to recognize the danger they were in. Finally, the merchant remembered his children's favorite thing, a cart pulled by white oxen they'd always wanted to ride. He called out, "Children, come outside quickly. I have brought the most wonderful cart pulled by pure white oxen for you to ride." Instantly, the children dropped their toys and ran outside, saving themselves from the flames. The Buddha explained that we are like those children, so attached to temporary pleasures and possessions that we don't realize the house is burning around us. The house represents our impermanent world, the toys are our attachments, and the fire is the suffering that inevitably comes from clinging to what must eventually be lost. Understanding the first noble truth in modern life. Let me tell you about James, a successful surgeon who learned this lesson the hard way. For 20 years, he had built his entire identity around his surgical skills. His hands were insured for millions, his reputation was impeccable, and his sense of self-worth was entirely tied to his ability to perform complex operations. Then, at 55, he developed a tremor. Minor at first, but progressive. Within a year, his surgical career was over. James fell into a deep depression. Without surgery, who was he? He had been so attached to his identity as a surgeon that he couldn't see himself as anything else. He spent months in denial, seeing specialist after specialist, trying experimental treatments, refusing to accept what was happening. His wife later said, he was like a man trying to hold on to smoke, exhausting himself grasping at something that had already dissipated. One day, sitting in yet another waiting room, James picked up a book someone had left behind, a collection of Buddhist teachings. One line struck him: suffering is not caused by what we lose, but by our refusal to accept the loss. He read it again and again. For the first time, he understood that his surgical career had always been temporary, even when it seemed permanent. Everything is. Slowly, James began to let go, not of his love for medicine, but of his attachment to being the one performing it. He became a teacher, training young surgeons, and discovered a joy he'd never known in the operating room. When I was operating, he later reflected, I saved one patient at a time. Now, through my students, I save thousands. I had to let go of my small dream to receive a bigger purpose. Part 2: The Nature of Impermanence, Life's Greatest Teacher. The Zen Garden Secret. A young American student traveled to Japan to study in a famous Zen monastery, drawn by photos of its perfect garden. When he arrived, he was assigned to care for this garden, expecting to maintain its perfection. But the master gave him strange instructions. Every morning, after you've raked the paths and cleaned every leaf, shake the cherry tree until a few petals fall. Then, and only then, is the garden perfect. The student was confused. But master, I just cleaned everything. Why would I deliberately make it imperfect? The master smiled. A garden trying to be permanently perfect is not natural, it's dead. Life includes falling petals, leaves that drift, and grass that grows. When we accept and include impermanence in our definition of perfection, we stop fighting nature and start dancing with it. The seasons of our lives. Consider how nature teaches us about letting go every single year. Trees don't desperately cling to their leaves when autumn comes, crying out, "But these leaves are mine. I grew them myself. They're beautiful. I need them." No, trees release their leaves gracefully, knowing that letting go is not death but preparation for new growth. They understand what we struggle to accept. Holding on to what's ready to fall only prevents new leaves from growing. Michelle learned this lesson through her 18-year marriage. She and David had been college sweethearts, built a life together, and raised 2 children. But over the years, they had grown in different directions. He wanted adventure, travel, spontaneity. She craved stability, routine, roots. They loved each other but were no longer in love, and trying to force their relationship to be what it once was only created resentment. The decision to divorce felt like a failure to Michelle. She had promised, "Till death do us part," and here she was, choosing to part while both were very much alive. She spent months in therapy, wrestling with guilt, until her therapist asked a simple question: if a tree held onto its dead leaves, would new ones be able to grow? Michelle realized she'd been trying to keep autumn leaves green by sheer force of will. The divorce wasn't a failure, it was an acknowledgement that their season together had ended. They could honor what had been while accepting what now was. They divorced not with bitterness but with gratitude for the years they'd shared and the children they'd raised. Both remarried eventually, finding partners who matched who they'd become rather than who they'd been. "Letting go of my marriage didn't mean it failed," Michelle says now. "It meant it was complete." We often mistake completion for failure, but they're not the same thing. Part 3: Non-Attachment, the Most Misunderstood Teaching. The Monk and the Woman at the River. 2 monks were traveling when they came to a river where a young woman stood, unable to cross due to the strong current. Despite their vows to avoid contact with women, the elder monk picked her up, carried her across, and set her down on the other side. The monks then continued their journey in silence. Hours later, the younger monk couldn't contain himself any longer. "How could you touch that woman? We have taken vows." The elder monk replied, "I set her down at the river. You're still carrying her." This story perfectly illustrates non-attachment. The elder monk could engage fully with the situation, helping someone in need, without becoming attached to it. He picked up what needed picking up, then put it down when the moment passed. The younger monk, though he never touched the woman, carried her in his mind for hours, creating suffering through his mental attachment. Love without possession. Non-attachment in relationships is perhaps the most challenging concept for Western minds to grasp. We equate love with holding tight, with forever, with possession. But Buddhist teaching suggests that true love is like holding a butterfly. You can appreciate its beauty, feel its delicate presence, but if you close your hand to keep it, you'll crush the very thing you're trying to preserve. Robert and Anna had been married for 10 years when Anna was offered her dream job, working with an international health organization in Africa. It would mean being apart for at least 2 years. Robert's first instinct was to ask her not to go. He loved her, needed her, couldn't imagine daily life without her. But then he remembered something his grandmother once told him: love isn't about keeping someone close. It's about wanting their happiness more than your comfort. He realized that asking Anna to stay would be asking her to be less than who she was meant to be. That's not love, that's ownership. Go, he told her. Follow your dream. We'll figure out the rest. Those 2 years were challenging, but their relationship deepened in unexpected ways. Their communications became more intentional, their reunions more precious. When Anna returned, she came back not because she had to, but because she chose to. Robert loved me enough to let me fly, she says. That's how I knew he was the person I wanted to return to. These profound teachings can transform your daily experience. Subscribe to Buddha Coha for more wisdom that bridges ancient truth with modern life. Part 4: The Practice of Acceptance, Embracing What Is. The Master's Broken Cup. A Zen master was drinking tea from his favorite cup when a student accidentally knocked it from the table, shattering it. The student was mortified, expecting anger, but the master simply looked at the pieces and said, "Ah, my cup has fulfilled its purpose. It has returned to the state it was always moving toward." The student was confused. "Master, aren't you upset? That was your favorite cup." "It was," the master agreed, picking up a piece and admiring how the light played on the broken edge. "But you see, the cup was already broken the moment it was made. Every cup, every bowl, every person, we're all moving toward breaking. I enjoyed this cup while it was whole, and now I'll enjoy remembering it. Nothing has been lost except an illusion of permanence. When life breaks our expectations." Catherine was 34 when she received the diagnosis, early onset Parkinson's disease. She was a pianist, a mother of 2 young children, a woman who had planned every detail of her life. The diagnosis shattered not just her present but her entire imagined future. She saw herself in a wheelchair at her children's graduations, unable to play piano at their weddings, dependent when she had always been fiercely independent. For months, she fought against the diagnosis with the fury of someone at war. She tried every treatment, conventional and alternative. She exercised obsessively, as if she could outrun the disease. She researched constantly, as if knowledge could defeat biology. But the tremors continued, subtle but undeniable. The turning point came during a piano lesson she was giving. Her student, a young girl with cerebral palsy, was struggling with a piece. "I can't do it," the girl cried. "My hands won't do what I want." Catherine heard her own frustration echoed in this child's voice. She sat beside her student and said words that surprised them both. "Then let's discover what your hands can do, not what they can't." In that moment, Catherine realized she'd been giving herself advice. She began to explore what was possible within her limitations rather than raging against them. She adapted her piano technique, creating beautiful, simplified arrangements. She focused on what she could give her children now rather than mourning what she might not give them later. Acceptance isn't giving up, Catherine explains. It's giving into reality, to the present moment, to what is rather than what should be. And in that surrender, I found a strange freedom. Part 5, Mindfulness, the gateway to letting go. The student who couldn't stop thinking. A student approached his meditation teacher in frustration. "Master, I've been meditating for years, but I can't stop my thoughts. They come constantly, planning, remembering, worrying. I'm a failure at meditation." The teacher led him to a window overlooking a busy street. "Tell me," he said, "can you stop those cars from passing?" "Of course not," the student replied. "Can you stop the clouds from moving across the sky?" "No." "Then why do you think you should be able to stop your thoughts?" "Thoughts are like cars on that street. You don't own them, you don't control them, you simply observe them passing. The problem isn't that you have thoughts. The problem is that you keep jumping into the cars." Living in the present moment. Marcus was a Wall Street trader whose mind lived permanently in the future. Every conversation was interrupted by phone checks, every meal was eaten while reading reports, and every weekend was spent preparing for Monday. He was successful by every external measure but felt like he was drowning in his own life. The wake-up call came during his daughter's school play. She had a small part, just 3 lines, but she'd practiced for weeks. As she stepped onto the stage, Marcus felt his phone vibrate. Without thinking, he glanced at it, a message about Asian markets. When he looked up, his daughter was walking off stage. He'd missed it. 3 lines, maybe 30 seconds, and he'd missed it for numbers that would be irrelevant by morning. That night, his daughter asked, "Did you see me, Daddy?" "Of course," he lied. "Then what did I say?" Her question hung in the air like an indictment. Marcus realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd been fully present for anything. He was always somewhere else, in tomorrow's meeting, yesterday's mistake, anywhere but here. He began what he called presence practice. Simple things: when drinking coffee, just drink coffee. When talking to his wife, he puts the phone in another room. When walking, feel his feet on the ground instead of rehearsing presentations. It was harder than any deal he'd ever negotiated. But slowly, life began to reveal itself in ways he'd never noticed. The way morning light caught in his wife's hair. His son's elaborate stories about dinosaurs. The taste of food when he wasn't reading while eating. "I thought being present would make me less productive," Marcus says. "Instead, it made me less busy but more effective. There's a difference." Part 6, Renunciation, the freedom of less. The rich man's burden. A wealthy merchant sought out a Buddhist master, complaining of constant anxiety. "I have everything," he said, "yet I can't sleep. I worry constantly about protecting what I have." The master asked him to fill a bag with his most precious possessions and carry it on his back for 1 full day without setting it down. By noon, the merchant was exhausted. By evening, his back ached terribly. When the day ended, he dropped the bag with relief. "This is your life," the master said. "You carry all your possessions not on your back but in your mind. No wonder you're exhausted. The question isn't how to carry the load better, but whether you need to carry it at all." The liberation of letting go. Sandra inherited her mother's house, a beautiful Victorian filled with 3 generations of accumulation. Every room was a museum of family history, china that was never used, furniture covered in plastic, closets full of clothes from decades past. Sandra spent her weekends cleaning, organizing, and maintaining things that no one ever enjoyed. One day, overwhelmed by a basement flood that damaged boxes of items she'd forgotten existed, Sandra sat among the soggy memories and laughed. She laughed at the absurdity of spending her life maintaining things for some future that never came. Her mother had saved everything for Sunday special, but Sunday never came, and now Sandra was doing the same thing. She began what she called the Great Liberation. Not carelessly, but thoughtfully. She kept what truly mattered: her grandmother's wedding ring, her father's watch, photos that told stories. Everything else she donated, sold, or gave to family members who would actually use them. The house transformed from a museum to a home. Without clutter, light flooded in. Without excess furniture, rooms felt spacious. Without the burden of maintaining and used possessions, Sandra had time for living. She took art classes, something she'd always wanted to do but never had time for. She traveled, using money that would have gone to storage and maintenance. I thought I was honoring my family by keeping everything, she reflects. But I was actually dishonoring their memory by choosing things over experiences. They worked hard so I could have a good life, not so I could be a curator of their possessions. Part 7. Integration, Living the Practice Daily. The Potter's Daily Wisdom. An apprentice asked a master potter, "When will I know I've mastered the art?" The potter, who had been making pottery for 50 years, smiled. "Every morning when I sit at my wheel, I'm a beginner. The clay is different, the day is different, I am different. Mastery isn't a destination you reach but a practice you maintain. The moment you think you've arrived, you've already started declining." This is the essence of Buddhist practice, not reaching some final state of enlightenment where you never again grasp or cling, but continuously practicing letting go, moment by moment, day by day. Creating your practice. The power of letting go isn't accessed through grand gestures but through small, daily practices. Here are practical ways to integrate this wisdom. Morning release. Start each day by consciously letting go of yesterday. Before your feet hit the floor, take 3 deep breaths. With each exhale, release something: yesterday's argument, tomorrow's worry, the need to be perfect today. The evening inventory. Before bed, scan your day. What are you holding that you can release? Not to forget important lessons, but to release the emotional charge. Imagine placing today's troubles in a box by your bedside, telling them, if you're truly important, you'll still be here tomorrow. The sacred pause. When you feel tension rising, in traffic, in conversation, in frustration, pause. Ask yourself, what am I gripping right now? Often, just becoming aware of our clenching allows us to relax our hold. A story of complete transformation. Peter spent 30 years building his company, working 18-hour days, missing family gatherings, and postponing vacations. "When I sell the company," he always said, "then I'll enjoy life." The company was his identity, his purpose, his pride. When a buyer finally offered an incredible sum, Peter couldn't let go. He found problems with every offer, reasons to delay. His wife finally asked, "Are you holding on to the company, or is it holding on to you?" That question haunted him. He realized he was terrified of who he'd be without the company. The business that was supposed to be his path to freedom had become his prison. It took another year of inner work, but Peter finally sold. The first month of retirement was agony. He didn't know what to do with himself. But slowly, he began to discover who he was beyond CEO. He learned to paint, badly but joyfully. He coached young entrepreneurs, not for money but for meaning. He had long conversations with his wife, really seeing her for the first time in decades. "I thought letting go of my company would be like cutting off a limb," Peter says. "Instead, it was like removing shackles I hadn't realized I was wearing." The Buddha's essential message. Before his death, the Buddha gave his disciples one final teaching: all conditioned things are impermanent. Work out your liberation with diligence. Notice he didn't say, with stress or with force, but with diligence, steady, patient, persistent practice. Letting go isn't a one-time achievement but a moment-by-moment choice. Every breath is an opportunity to release. Every day is a chance to begin again. The path isn't about never holding on but about recognizing when we're gripping too tightly and having the wisdom to open our hands. Your path forward. As you continue from this moment, remember that letting go is not about becoming emotionless or detached from life. It's about engaging fully while holding lightly. It's about loving deeply while accepting impermanence. It's about working toward goals while being at peace with whatever comes. The Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh writes, "Letting go gives us freedom, and freedom is the only condition for happiness." If in our heart we still cling to anything, anger, anxiety, or possessions, we cannot be free. This freedom isn't something you need to travel to find or pay to acquire. It's available right now, in this moment, with your next breath. Breathe in, acknowledging what is. Breathe out, releasing what's ready to go. 3 keys to remember. First, what you're holding on to might be holding you back. That grudge isn't punishing them, it's poisoning you. That regret isn't changing the past, it's stealing your present. That desperate need for control isn't making you safer, it's making you suffer. Second, letting go isn't about loss, it's about liberation. When you release what's heavy, you don't become less, you become lighter. When you open your clenched fists, you don't lose what you were holding, you gain the ability to receive. Third, the peace you're seeking isn't in some perfect future when everything is resolved. It's available right now, in this choice to release what you cannot control and embrace what is. A final Buddhist story. A disciple once asked the Buddha, "Master, what is the difference between you and me?" The Buddha replied, "When I eat, I eat. When I walk, I walk. When I sleep, I sleep. But I do those things too," the disciple said, confused. "When you eat," the Buddha explained, "you think about walking. When you walk, you think about sleeping. When you sleep, you think about eating. I simply do what I'm doing, fully present, without carrying the past or future. That's the difference. This is the ultimate letting go, releasing our constant mental time travel to be fully where we are. Not forever, that would be another impossible standard to grasp, but for this moment. And then the next. And the next. The journey of letting go begins not tomorrow, not when you're ready, not when circumstances are perfect, but right now, with this breath, with this choice to release even a little of what you've been carrying. What will you choose to let go of today? Thank you for joining us on this exploration of Buddhist wisdom for modern life. If these teachings have resonated with you, subscribe to Buddha Coha and become part of a community walking this path together. Share this message with someone who might be ready to lighten their load. Your journey toward freedom matters, and we're here to support you every step of the way. May you find the courage to let go, the wisdom to know when, and the peace that comes from releasing what was never yours to hold forever.